Welcome into the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast presented by Seatgeek, a podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad.
Back to Naji, right corner for the heat check. Goal! Naji Marshall. 3 of 4 from distance.
The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pelicans Podcast presented by Seatgeek. I am Joe Cardosi, joined once again by the lion-hearted Jim Eichenhofer as we continue our player breakdowns, and we are going to be delighted later to be joined by Erin, Hartigan of Bally Sports, Hall of Famer here on the Pelicans Podcast. But we are going to be breaking down the knife, Mr. Naji Marshall. A fun player to root for, had a bunch of fun moments, got memed a lot by the Pelicans fans this season. Sort of an up and down one for Naji, but fun to root for that guy.
Yeah, it really is. He definitely had the vast majority of his best performances were, say, before mid-January.
Yeah.
That was really when he played the most and was able to fill, a larger role. It was funny because, I mean, he was kind of the definition of from night to night. You don't know exactly what you're going to be asked to do.
Yeah.
He started a good amount of games, but it wasn't like it was all in one stretch or all in two stretches.
Right.
It was kind of like bits and pieces throughout
Yeah,
the course of the
start and
season.
stop.
So, but he did a good job of really, I think, filling in when he was called upon. The Pelicans went 12-9 when he was a starter this year, so that was definitely a credit to him that, they really almost had exactly the same winning percentage when he started as they did in the games when he was coming off the bench.
Right.
Pelicans were 12-5 when Naji had 15-plus points, which I don't know exactly what that means, but, I mean, when he did have a really productive night, the effectiveness of the team went way up. But, again, just like with his minutes, the majority of those games where he had double-figure points or 15 or more points happened in the first half of the season. 18 of his 21 starts took place October through January. He just had 3 after that, basically towards the tail end of the season when they were super shorthanded. So it was an interesting year. I mean, it was a big fluctuation from month to month or week to week as far as how much he was on the court.
Right, and you just weren't sure what you were going to get from Naji. He had some dazzling passes. He had some head-scratching lobs. So it was hard to figure out. But, it was great to see Naji out there being the enforcer for the Pelicans. You look at Naji, you wouldn't think that's the guy that's going to go enforce on the court. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of the role he took over. He seemed to relish that.
Yeah, there are times when I kind of sit there and laugh, and it's like when somebody starts something with the other team. Like, for example, when Phoenix got in the Pelicans' faces after Zion's breakaway dunk at the end of the first win that New Orleans had over them.
That was great.
It felt like Naji was like, sometimes in a case like that, he's like, man, I've been waiting for this moment for my whole life.
Yep.
So he's definitely ready to jump in when there's
Just
a
like
confrontation.
Jim. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, I got to
Exactly.
keep Jim on a chain. He's like a rabid dog. If somebody starts talking smack about the Pelicans podcast, which they always do, we're just a hot ticket item here, man. But Naji's he's got heavy hands. He likes to think, and so does Jim. So watch out. But yeah, he's a fun guy, and I love to see some of the Twitter memes that Naji got made into. The knife got to be maybe one of the coolest nicknames in the NBA. And we continue to be glued to the playoffs, and now we find ourselves in a bit of a rooting conundrum, Jim, because Lakers and Warriors, how do you wash the stink off you from rooting for either one of them?
It's funny. I really didn't struggle too much with that decision, to be honest with you. I'm all on board with, I know I've said and tweeted and thought some things that were not too kind to Draymond Green, but let's go Draymond.
Oh, man. Oh, that just hurt me hearing it, but it's odd to see it coming out of Jim's mouth. It's like you're an AI or something. Do I really know you?
Yeah, man, for the next 2 weeks, I'm all about the Warriors. I didn't really... If it's the Lakers versus anyone,
yes.
So
yes.
So it really wasn't that difficult for me. But though I do understand what you're saying, that after we saw some of the stuff that we got from Golden State in the head-to-head matchups for New Orleans, it doesn't feel great to root for them. But It's okay. It's
now
the
that
lesser of two evils.
The pick interest is sort of out the window, in terms of the juicy pick there. So now it becomes, how much can I not stand to watch LeBron and Anthony Davis succeed?
Yeah, I want them out of the playoffs too. I don't want them in the Western Conference Finals. So
yeah.
So that was easy for me. You know what was also easy for me was the Nuggets-Suns series. It was very easy for me to put everything I have behind Denver.
See, that one's easy for me. That one I'm like, oh yeah, go Nuggets, because that one's a piece of cake. Denver, sort of a cool city like New Orleans, you could say. And, the Joker's always fun to root for. That one I don't feel stinky, like rooting for Denver. But, boy, Lakers and Warriors, I'm just going to have to sort of just grimace at the TV and go, I don't care what happens for all those games.
I'm curious. I like to use these Twitter polls. I would be curious if I put a poll out there of, okay, Pelicans fans, who are you rooting for between the Lakers and the Warriors? I'm confident that most people would say the Warriors, but I am a little curious to see what the percentage would be.
You also got to leave a third option that says, what are you doing to us by asking this? Because you're going to get a lot of hate, but it's worth asking, man. It's a weird playoff series. And it's going to be interesting going forward. Who knows what could happen? We'll be glued to it. You'll hear me and Jim hollering in some bar. But speaking of hollering in some bar, our next guest is one of our favorites, Erin Hartigan. Always great to hear from her. And we want to talk some Naji Marshall. So let's talk the knife with our own knife, Erin Hartigan. Joining us on the Pelicans podcast, we had to take the people's request, Jim. The people were clamoring, more Hartigan. And
Definitely.
we could not keep the people down. So joining us on the Pelicans podcast, your friend and ours, Erin Hartigan. How are you doing?
I'll thank my family for being like those people, those only people that were probably shot. And they might not even be on that list.
Well, you got a big family because there were myriad.
They might not even have made the list of quote-unquote people. But, no, it's great to be back on with you guys. And my highlight, my celebration today is hanging with the two of you. I feel very centered. Like, I don't know why. I feel like it must have been the morning yoga like I didn't do.
I think it's Jim. Jim just centers
right?
me. He's like our Buddha. He just walks in and I feel the zen.
And not to mention, I mean, we get to talk about today as David Wesley so eloquently shouts, and he does it better than anyone. Naji.
We should have just
See,
had
that
a
was
David
like the poor
Wesley
man's version,
cameo.
and those are normally what I bring here to the podcast.
Yes,
is the off-brand.
Yes,
that's the off-brand David Wesley. But I love every time. It's like I love when he shouts that. In fact, I'm going to post that on Twitter today so you guys can all enjoy it.
Jim and I were talking about, just how much he was memed by the Pelicans fan base on Instagram and Twitter, and he was a fun guy to root for. Easy to meme because he's very charismatic. He's very flashy. Some of the passes that he made were great. And there were just so many fun moments within the season covering Naji Marshall, it seemed like.
Yeah, and that's the thing you and I we'd all kind of, talked about it before kind of hopping on air here is like what I really want to celebrate is his growth that we saw this year, right? In fact, you mentioned some people were a little questioned maybe at the beginning of the season, how might he fit in? What effect he might have. I mean, he had so many, up and down trips to the G League and whatnot. Right. One of my favorite Pelicans fans was just telling me he might have to go back and find the preseason receipts in which he insisted Naji was going to be a difference maker this year and totally got clowned for it. I think he's found those receipts, mister, if I must say so, because listen, I mean, one, it's hard to believe Naji's only been in the league for like 3 seasons. I don't know why it feels so much longer. There might have been a global pandemic in between there that may have something to do with that.
Yeah.
But he has most definitely become one of my favorite players. And yes, because we get to extend his name whenever we say it. And yes, because he is a hilarious personality. But he's become one of my faves because of his journey, his grind, his rise to this point in his career. I mean, he went from undrafted out of Xavier to becoming a Swiss Army knife starter, as we should call him, for the Pelicans. Yeah. Not to mention, again, he's just a great personality. But Christian Clark, in fact, I got to throw this out there, had a great write-up on that rise on NOLA.com after Naji's career night over the Pacers back in December. I know you guys, who could imagine a kid from the Northwest, Jim, would pan out like this?
Yeah. Pride of
He was born in Atlantic City, I think, New Jersey, right? I think.
Yes, Jersey, and then he went to high school in Maryland. So he was kind of like a Northwest kid.
We just have that dog in us. That's what it is.
Yeah, I need one of the dog X-ray with Jim in it. That's Joe. That is your assignment for today. Is to create one.
Jim surrounded by pit bulls in a chest cavity. I'm on it.
Also, can I tandem for a second? Another investigation I think we need Jim on. Naji became known, at some point in the season, he became known as the Knife.
Yeah.
And I remember a point when he told me he didn't even know where it came from. He didn't even know where it came from. Someone had asked him about it.
Not sure if I remember the lore now.
That actually was Willy Green that coined that, which is kind of funny because, Willy Green is pretty low key laid back, but he was actually the one because someone asked Willy Green, if they were like, if Larry Nance Jr. is the Swiss Army knife, the guy that is kind of doing all these different things, what is Naji? And Willy Green said, he's just a knife. He's just out there cutting people. So
no, it's absolutely most appropriate because he was that multi-tool player that affects the game in so many different ways, seen and often unseen in a box score, and certainly displayed that this year. But I will tell you, I kind of like the nicknames. We also used to call him on the show the Junkyard Dog or the Bulldog. I think same could be said for Jose. And I'll tell you, they both dig it. They love, they're about that life. They love that. And it's very fitting for both of them in terms of how they embody really not only this team, but this city. I mean, think about it. We talk about this often. The resiliency, the fight, that next man up mentality, the I got you, you got me, and darn well Naji's going to have, as you alluded to, Joe, darn well in any circumstance, he's going to have your back. He doesn't play around. And respectfully, of course, but he will go to battle for his teammates, or as he calls them, his fam. He will go to battle with his fam, and he will run through walls for the city. In fact, I mentioned a little earlier, the fact that he's just loving New Orleans. He told me he feels he's thriving here. In fact, he called it a beautiful situation, which it is. I love the city and everything about it. And the more I think about it, New Orleans is kind of synonymous with Naji's journey here, right? When you think about it, Naji has confidently declared he feels he is tougher than anyone in the world. And those are his words. He feels he is tougher than anyone in the world. That is New Orleans, y'all. With all it's been through, it has persevered, and so has Naji. That's a really cool reflection to think about today.
Definitely. Part of this was that he was one of the guys that was on, not injured very much, and he was rarely sidelined, but he played the fifth most minutes on the team. He played over 1,700, and he played 77 games, which was the third most games that anyone played this year. I think one of the things that was interesting about, if you followed his season really closely, is that it seemed like from week to week and month to month, even sometimes game to game, what they needed from him was different. So, I mean, how much of his value to the team beyond, the fact that he was so available that, like I said, he played the fifth most minutes, was that he is a guy that's capable of, okay, we need you to score. He had 5 games of 20-plus points. Yeah. We need you to be a playmaker. I thought he really did some good stuff with his passing this year. And just his energy, too. It just seems like he is one of the guys that's most capable of being kind of a chameleon, that he can just do from game to game what you need from him.
Oh, my gosh, yes. And he's always ready when called upon. Much like a Billy Hernangomez, right? That was really the majority of the second unit. I mean, those guys were ready when their number was called. And I think a lot of where Naji's growth has stemmed is, and I give total credit to a guy like Willy Green, in just watching him. And you only, and Jim and Joe, you both know this, you briefly get to kind of witness him in that gym element with the team, during shoot-arounds or practices. Yeah. But I do know that he's not only a coach that coaches on the court, but equally as important, he coaches off of it. Yeah. And he's all about developing not only the player, but the man, the husband, the father, the brother. And what I think is cool about him and Naji's relationship is he has allowed Naji to be who he is. Yeah. And allow him to own that. and like own that like dog in him and do what he does best. And Willy like lights a fire under that almost, it's celebrated. And I dig that. And as Jim alluded to, you see its effects. His scoring has improved. He's always been a defensive force. And I feel like force with Naji is putting it lightly, but he's developed a nice little 3-ball when needed. Shouts Fred Vinson on that one and his school of coaching, as we call it. As you know, I've kind of been a very, very small witness, as have you both, to Fred's transformation of Naji's shot. I'll watch them after shoot-arounds or practices. He's transforming that shot much like he did Brandon's and Herb's and Lonzo's when he was here, right? So I am like a firm believer and advocate for the Fred Vinson program. Side note. Yeah. I do think, though, what separates Naji from a lot of the other 3-and-D type guys is his passing, like Jim said. He's especially fun to watch when he's, like, dishing it out in traffic, in the lane. Like, he has some moments this year when I'm like, dang, okay, I see you.
He had so many, like, exotic layups. He had so many creative passes, that sort of no-look where he sort of did the anime pose after. And that was one of my favorite moments. There are just so many great little moments that Naji had. You can't really know. There were some games that he took over when he needed to be in the starting lineup because of injury, and just being available, being sort of a glue guy, a culture guy in the locker room. It just seemed important to have Naji there, whether or not he was at the forefront of an actual game. But I mean, what were some of your favorite moments this season between the crazy passes, between some of the fun interviews, between him being a hype man for his other teammates? It's just hard to pick one for me.
One, you mentioned like his celebrations, like after after scoring. Younger fans are watching him and just embracing him, which is really cool with this next generation. But again, going back to that Swiss Army knife reference, I mean, he can pass, he can shoot, he can drive, he can crash boards. I think his playmaking and decision-making has skyrocketed immensely this year. I think that was one of the biggest things I'd seen. And it led to some timely plays from him in moments that we needed. Yeah. And I was sitting there like a proud mama watching that, watching him like, Hercules. Well, David over there shouting, Naji. I mean, it just was like rockets. I mean, our office is going nuts. And I remember it was the game against Indiana in December. And I can't remember whether it was on that 7-game win streak or not. But I mean, we were like a top 3 team in the West at the time. And he had a career high then of 22 against the Pacers. He would eventually get like 24 in January. But, I loved getting to see not only him grow and be celebrated in those sort of victories and career moments, but see the team also like celebrating him for those, and kind of getting that love back that he has given to so many of them in their highest of moments. I mean, that is this team in a nutshell. They truly, genuinely care for one another and root for one another and celebrate another's success. And I think nothing but positive is going to come from that as we continue.
It's great to see the undrafted guys getting some love between Jose, between Naji. Great to see the Pelicans sort of growing organically. And great to hear from you again, Erin Hartigan. It's been a weird offseason as we continue to watch the playoffs and continuing to break down these players. But one ray of sunshine we always knew we could count on, you calling into the podcast. Thank you for joining these two old dogs once again.
Well, I hope you both get a good vacay in this summer because you both so much deserve. It's been an absolute blast getting to hang with you all season long. But Joe, I will leave you with this. I know, my friend, you are still hurting over this season finale. Yeah. It was a rough one. Yeah. It was an underwhelming one. Just know I am consoling you from afar, but in the meantime, letting Jim do that. So, Jim, God help you. Give Joe a big old hug and keep kicking tail, fellas.
Thank you, Erin. And I get a free hug from Jim. Bonus.
We all win.
Always a blast with Erin Hartigan. Chaos encapsulated. So glad to hear from her on the Pelicans podcast, as always. And we talked about Naji. We've talked about so many players on this podcast, and we will be talking about Dyson Daniels tomorrow, but we didn't want to leave out anyone. And, a lot of players gave meaningful minutes, even if they didn't hit, let's say, the cutoff of where we were going to be doing podcasts. And it was great to catch up with some of them in the exit interviews.
Yeah, there were a total of 5 players that did exit interviews that didn't reach the cutoff that you mentioned. In today's clips, we're going to kind of go over some of the veteran guys, just like Naji Marshall, guys that have been in the league for multiple years and have that experience. Starting with Kira Lewis Jr., he had kind of an up and down season as well. Had to kind of get through his rehab before he was able to really even start the season on the floor. But in this clip, he talks about just basically here are some of the things that he's going to focus on in the off season.
Just different finishes, just trying to slow down, always work on my shot, getting stronger on defensive end, so ball handling, pretty much everything that I feel like as a guard you need in the league.
And kind of to add to that, Kira talked about one of the things that he's focusing on, not just this offseason, but just in general, is watching players like De'Aaron Fox of Sacramento. People always notice,
Not a bad guy to watch.
Right, and people talk about how fast De'Aaron Fox is. Kira Lewis is really in that category as one of the fastest players in the NBA. But one of the things that Kyra's taken away from watching Fox is just his ability to kind of change pace. And he mentioned how one of the things that he wants to try to copy that De'Aaron Fox does is he might fly down the court, but he'll just come to a complete stop and just throw the defense out of balance completely. Just slowing down and just kind of going from stopping and starting. Yeah. Exactly. Changing his gears. I think that's something that will benefit Kira a ton. We all know, like, it's him being as fast as he is a huge strength of his, but now he's going to kind of add to that by figuring out ways to keep teams off balance.
And I know people wanted a bunch of Kira minutes. Hard to find minutes in the guard rotation, especially you don't want to have experimental minutes in crucial stretches. But, it's going to be interesting to see how he carves out a role for himself, and definitely speed, being able to slash to the rim would help. You could take some of the focus off of Zion there sometimes. And also, we just need good guard play. And, another guy that we loved seeing, he came in late in the season, had to sort of orient to the team a bit, was Josh Richardson, who's a savvy vet in the league. He's on a one-year deal, so interesting to see how he sort of fit in here with the team.
Yeah, you mentioned the challenge of trying to find minutes for Kira Lewis Jr., and this is something that we're also going to address in Friday's episode tomorrow with Dyson Daniels, that it wasn't the kind of thing where you come into the season and you're guaranteed minutes because of the depth. So, like you said, they added Josh Richardson at the trade deadline. He added to the depth, but also made it more difficult for some of the younger guys maybe to necessarily kind of crack the rotation.
Especially because he plays defense well, too, and so he's going to get minutes there.
For sure. Some of the stuff that he did was very needed. But in this clip that Josh Richardson gave from his exit interviews in April, he just basically talks about the challenge of his experience of being traded here, midway through the season, and kind of goes through just the positives and the negatives of that.
It's always a tough situation, moving in the middle of the season, trying to figure out where you fit, what your role is, getting along with everyone, and still being assertive. So I'm happy with how it went. I think it could have went a little better, but it could always go worse. So I'm satisfied, but I wish we could have went further. I think we had potential too, but personally, I think that the guys accepted me well, and they really, made me feel at home here. So
Josh also talked about in his exit interview about how he lives in Miami during the offseason. So he played for the Heat and apparently really liked that city, so he's decided to stay there. He's been on a bunch of different teams, but must be nice to be able to spend your offseason there. He has
a beach house next to gym. It's crazy,
that was supposed to be kept confidential.
Oh, sorry.
Now it's out. But Josh talked about how one of the things that he's planning on doing is hanging with Trey Murphy in Florida this summer. So yeah, I guess apparently that's part of Josh's off-season program, is he's gonna hang with Trey. Maybe Trey can work with him on his jumper.
Yeah.
I thought Josh made a good amount of his threes, and that was something that helped the team as well. But we'll get some some footage. Maybe the squad will be there.
And one of the other fan favorites, I feel like, is Garrett Temple, Uncle Temp. Another guy
GT.
who got memed by one of our favorites at Retro Pels there. Garrett Temple, I guess he made that 1-3 that basically was the height of my season. I know there were a lot of highs and lows of the season, but the Garrett Temple 3 was great for me. You just love to see Garrett Temple getting some minutes because it meant that the game was in hand, basically. Right. But he's been a great coach on the floor, a great glue guy in the locker room. And, we love Uncle Tim.
Yeah, he played 162 minutes over the course of the whole season. He played in 25 games, which obviously neither of those are a ton of minutes or games. But I think the prominent role that he played with the team was really more about what he contributed in the locker room, some of the mentoring that he did, some of the advice and guidance that he gave to some of the younger players. And in this clip of Garrett from his exit interview, he basically just talks about how proud he was of some of the development of some of the younger players and just how, the talent and potential that this core group of guys that are in their early 20s is reason why people should be optimistic about the future of the Pelicans.
Oh, man. First of all, the young guys, what Herb and Jose did last year was surreal. And then what Trey and Herb and Jose did this year. And then, what Dyson was able to do, show flashes of what he's going to be able to do as an NBA player. It bodes really well for us as an organization going forward. And I'm just very proud of those guys for, how they were able to bounce back. Trey, specifically, doing what he was doing so consistently and then progressing throughout the season. I think everybody has seen the offensive stuff, but defensively, what he was able to do the last month of the season, I spoke to him about it. I think that's something that's really going to be really good for him. He's going to shoot the ball. He's going to be able to, do the dunks and things like that. But when he's able to defend and be a plus defensive player on the court, the sky's the limit for that guy. And I'm just really proud of him progressing the way he did. And also Herb, he started off a little tough, got injured, but really finished the last month and a half really, really strong for us. So really happy for those guys.
Garrett was also asked in his exit interview, how much game does he have left? And he kind of joked. He said, if you want to know if I can still hoop, just ask the guys in the Stay Fit games, the conditioning games that are for the players that don't play a lot. Apparently he was giving people a lot of work in those games based on his description of that.
Still got some hops.
So yeah, Garrett is not talking about, hanging up the sneakers and retiring. He still says he's got some game left and some hoop left in those sneakers. So we'll have to see what the future holds for Garrett. But I mean, how can you not be impressed? The couple times that I interviewed him this season, I mean, he just is a wealth of knowledge and experience and a great guy to have around to just help guys. He's just such a calming presence, kind of like myself.
Yes,
he's just a steady rock.
So zen. And the dances too. The Garrett Temple dance is very similar to yours. Great stuff there from all the guys. And we'll have more of those tomorrow as we continue this series of podcasts on the players. We'll be talking about Dyson Daniels, the Aussie, as we round this out with our own Mr. Todd Graffinini, and we will hear more from some of the other players that contributed, so stay tuned, check that out on the morrow. Thank you for listening to the Pelicans Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends and pals to subscribe, and click that 5 stars. We like that stuff. Thanks to Erin Hartigan for hanging out with us on the Pelicans Podcast, and we will talk to you once again tomorrow. So until then,
thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek.